Have you lost the art of connection in your life? Welcome back to the Parable Podcast. And if this is your first time listening, I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk. Joining me today is software developer Alan Snyder. Alan shares candidly about how God used him over the course of his faith journey.
I looked over and there was this dumpy old church. And I looked at it and I said, I'm going to go there on Sunday and I'm going to see what's up. And sure enough, I got there and the pastor pulled me over and he said, how you doing? And it just meant a lot to me because it was like somebody cared. That made all the difference.
Here's my conversation with Alan Snyder. I met each other through our local church at Westridge Community Church in Elgin, for those of you not in the Illinois area. And Alan, you have an infectious personality. You're always a great hugger, all right? Always welcoming, and just grateful to hear more about your story today.
Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Very excited, blessed. Thank you, Danielle.
Sure,
appreciate that.
Of course.
And back at you with the hugging thing. You are as well. So yeah, my story as far as my faith is concerned is kind of a tug of war a little bit. When I was in college, there were a couple of guys that I knew. Actually, one was my roommate. Both of them actually were my roommates in college, and they were both Christians. And I really thought not much of it. Frankly, thought they were a little strange, didn't understand it. And it was only years later that I still know their names, Billy Hallreiser and Jeff Parr. To this day, I haven't seen them in 30 plus years, but they had a huge impact on my faith in the sense that they planted those first two seeds, I guess we'll call it. And they know nothing about my faith walk since. I haven't seen them in 30 years, as I said. But it's interesting how I learned that early on, God puts people in our lives for a purpose. And we don't always see those seeds come to fruition, but we're always planting seeds, whether we know it, like it, or want to do it or not. And I guess in those 30 years plus, they would be laughing at me if they knew that I was running small groups and part of a marriage group and having a faith that I do, and my passion being, ministry in some point. So that was kind of the first thing that I learned, was that just because you don't think you're having an impact on someone's life, you are.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly easy.
Yeah, I have so many questions about that, Alan. Before we dive a little bit more into your story, I'd love to ask you, I know you're heavily invested in music. You love music, right? Mm-hmm. What is a genre of music that you love? And I would ask, what is something that maybe is a genre that you're people wouldn't know that I like?
I am sitting in my office. Behind my office is a huge poster of the band Journey. My favorite genre of music is rock, hard rock. As far as my musical journey is concerned, I went out to LA. Was in the hair band scene out there when I was in my late teens. Mm-hmm. And still to this day, music's obviously a huge part of my life. I have a side project, side gig, I guess, side hustle, whatever, Alan Snyder Entertainment, that I do on the weekends, bars, restaurants, all that stuff. As far as genres that I like, as I said, hard rock. As far as genres that I like that people might not know, I love a lot of the dark wave 80s synth stuff as well. The Cure, Depeche Mode. I listen to just as much first wave as I do the hair metal station or the 80s station. I am a countdown junkie, music countdown junkie. If I could come back to life as someone else, as far as my dream job, it would be as Casey Kasem.
Okay.
I could do that all day, every day, just sitting down and counting down the charts. Part of my act for what I do on the weekends is I do a lot of trivia, music trivia.
Yeah.
So I will sit here during the week on my phone and listen to the 80s countdown on the 80s channel, because I am obsessed with what song was number one this week in 1986.
Yes.
And I want to know about the song and how it came about. And every song has a story behind it. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, for me, it's not just a song, it's nostalgia. Where were you when you first heard this, or who were you with, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I Yeah, music's a huge part of my life.
Was music something like growing up, like that was your generation, like that was like you just love records, cassettes, whatever was on the radio?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky to grow up as a teenager in the best decade of all time, which was the 80s. And I think that was the best decade for music as well. So my mom was a piano teacher. So I had music kind of in my blood. I didn't know that I was so passionate about it until I think I was 15. And I went to the music store and there was a video playing and I looked at the video and it was Bon Jovi, You Give Love a Bad Name. And they were playing and I said, that's what I want to do. What do I need to do to get that going? And I picked up my first bass guitar, had no idea how to use it, had no idea how to tune it, nothing about it, whatever. And just incessantly started learning, on my own, piece by piece, bit by bit. A lot of time in the room, in my bedroom, just going over this and that, whatever. How do you do this? And it just kind of grew on me. And it really is. It's interesting. It's, for me, music is more than just something that we enjoy listening to. It's really therapy for me. Even today, if I don't practice or play guitar or keyboards or do some singing, even for an hour a day, it's like therapy for me. It relaxes me. It calms me down. And it's just something that I do every day that's been such a blessing. Yeah. And I totally understand that's from God because I've been a worship team leader at church. I've used music in my life to grow so much closer to God. Yeah. Through playing in church bands, being, like I said, being the worship team leader. It's led me so many places just in my faith as well. Love Christian artists and Christian music and doing that. Yeah. So that's been a huge plus as well.
You and your wife, Sam, have an adorable little guy, Elliot. I'd love to know, what is one of the challenges of being a dad right now? And what is something that you're just like, I am just so thankful for this moment in my life?
It's challenging being a parent because you never think that you're doing the best that you can, almost, it seems like. In other words, it's tough being a parent. I was a stay-at-home dad for a year and a half with him, and it takes a lot of patience. My biggest mistake with being a parent a lot of times was I would try to do two things at once with him, and you can't. I can't send an email and try to watch him. I can't try to talk on the phone and watch him. You have to be so attentive to your kid, when you're there. And he's, at this point in his life, he was 3 or 4. Yeah. I always thought that I could watch him and do something else. And I tried to multitask, and that just never worked. And so I think one of the toughest things as parents is we got to realize that we're not perfect in either our kids. And we just have to understand that we're doing the best we can. There's no playbook for this. There's no right or wrong or perfect or whatever. It's interesting you say we've got a fantastic little guy. Well, he comes home and he throws a tantrum. Yeah. That's what I get. And I'm sure as parents, we're all like at times, where's that kid when he gets home? Oh, yeah. Because, they get home and it's like, well, okay, where was that kid when you were at church today? You were such a good boy. And that can be tough. But as far as blessing is concerned, as tough as it was to balance work from home and watching a child, it was such a blessing to spend so much time with him because we had so many good times together, because I was able to be here with him. And there were times when, as difficult as it was, I really valued that and was incredibly blessed to be with my child instead of being at work all the time. I was able to go through a lot of things with him, and we'd go to the park and we'd do things like that. Those were huge blessings to me. I'm going to miss those times for the rest of my life. And now that he's in school, I don't spend as much time with him because he's in school. So he gets home and how was your day? And, now he's 5. So he gets home and sometimes it's hard to get a word out of him because he wants to go play with his iPad and Roblox, you know? And so it's like, okay, he's maturing. As difficult as it was a huge blessing.
No one gives you like the handbook of parenting when the kid is born. It's just like, good luck. Yeah. Thanks for being honest about that. You talked about your friends like 30 years ago that they kind of planted those seeds. And I'd be curious to know for you, Alan, when did Jesus become more than a name for you? Rather, like, was this something you grew up with, or is like, when did it actually become real for Alan?
It's kind of a slow process for me. I got involved when Campus Crusade for Christ back in 1991. And then I went to church. Really one of the first churches I really started attending. I got baptized in 1993. And I was going to a church called Ocean View for a while. And that had a huge impact on my life as far as just kind of growing a little bit. And then I went to a church called Sanctuary, and they were really living the Christian life. And at that point, I was really exposed to people that were, living a certain way that was different from the people that I was used to living like, or in a way that I was used to living. So that's kind of how I got started. And then I want to say back probably 1998, boy, I can't believe it was that long ago. I kind of drifted away for a while. I went 5 years without darkening the door of a church. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that I didn't have faith in God anymore. It's just that I didn't think that it was important enough to do anything about. I kind of drifted away, started doing my own things and partying and getting involved in the wrong crowds and, kind of like living that lukewarm life where I was never really happy. I didn't feel a sense of purpose. I felt that God was always there kind of in the background going, hey, there's a better way here. Did a lot of things that I regret, but I was able to come back because he called me home. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then when he called me home, probably 20 years ago now, at that point, I knew that I had to really make some changes, and I really had to prioritize what God wanted me to do. It's really not that difficult. You either prioritize God in your life or you don't. So I stopped making excuses as to why I was somewhat miserable and doing things that I shouldn't be doing, that I knew I shouldn't be doing. And I can only look back at it and say, it was probably, the Holy Spirit saying, listen, you can try to run and hide, but if God wants you, he's going to get you. You can do all this stuff, but eventually you're going to have to come to the conclusion that, God exists, he's here, he loves you, and he's not going to let you go. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those times where that's when I really started to get more involved, got into a men's group, started surrounding myself, I think, with better people. And that's kind of where I started my growth journey. And it's not been a steady slide up. I've still had periods of my life where, wow, slid back and this and that, but it's going to be like that for the rest of my life. I know that. Mm-hmm. I think that's why I'm so passionate about with my walk right now. I know how vital it is for people to connect outside of church. Mm-hmm. I know that's not an option. I am convinced that's because I've been there. I've had all different stages of spirituality in my life, but, I've had the stage in my life where I went to church for an hour thinking that was enough. And it wasn't. Mm-hmm. I just was right back in the world within 25 minutes. Yeah. And I thought that because I was spending an hour in church, not talking to anybody, not connecting with anybody, that I was just kind of like doing my penance and putting in my time, and that was enough. That's just no way to live. And I know so many people that do that now.
Yeah.
And so my passion is really connecting people that are in the church outside of it, is how I would explain it.
Yeah.
And so then I think especially with Westridge, if you want to fast forward, it was interesting because my wife and I had been going to Westridge for about 3 months, I want to say, maybe not even. Scott Alexander pulled us over. He said, we want you guys to start a marriage group. And I remember looking at him going, you have no idea how dysfunctional we are. We are not the type of people that you want. We can barely get in a marriage group, let alone run a marriage group.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He said, Scott, wait a minute. You might want to step back. And he said, listen, I want to come over to your house. And I want to have dinner with you guys. Mm-hmm. So he came over to our house. We had dinner. And we tried to demonstrate to him how dysfunctional we are and unworthy that we were. And listen, we don't know this and that. And my wife is a new Christian. And one of these, he came over and he said, you guys are perfect for this. We said, I guess my philosophy is if somebody else thinks that you can do something for your faith, you should do it. We weren't pushing this on anybody. We didn't go to Westridge with the intention of starting a marriage group, but somebody thought that we should. And that was 3 years ago almost, and it's been a huge blessing.
Yeah.
We get together every Wednesday, and it's like one of those things where you go, I kind of felt like Isaiah. I said, God said someone else, I'm not worthy. Don't send me. And that's always my first reaction in things. And then that's how my faith, but it's always interesting how God will put you in uncomfortable positions if he thinks you can do something. And so I find myself continually, in that position with regards to my faith. So, it's been a tremendous blessing. And then even from then, it's wonderful to be married to somebody who, is growing in her faith as well, and now we find ourselves almost, mentoring other people where we went from a place of not being comfortable about something where it's like, yeah, we can do this. We've been doing this long enough to know how that works. So that's been a huge blessing. I guess the bottom line is, if other people and God thinks you can do it, then who are you to say no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Type of thing.
Alan, I'm super impressed that you can remember dates, like to know that you're like, it was 1993. I like barely can remember our anniversary sometimes. And it is a running joke in our house.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. So like, take me back, like how you were talking earlier about like the planting of seeds with your friend Billy, and they probably like, you haven't talked to them in 30 years, but here you are, God is using you and Sam and just like connecting people truly. And like within your marriage. So is that like the story of what you want to share today? Is like that there's these like planting seeds over time. We're looking back. You can see God's handiwork, or is there something more to what you wanted to share today?
I think it's the planting of the seeds, and it's like always be aware of how God can use you in your life, and don't be your own worst enemy in that. Don't sabotage your faith because you don't think you can do something. Because if God thinks you can do something, then you can do it. I always run into a lot of people that just think that they're not capable of doing things that they are, especially with their faith. Like, oh, I shouldn't run a small group because I'm just not that good at talking to people or things like that. I would think that that would be the second thing to really talk about or focus on today is just be cognizant of how God wants to use you in your life. And if he wants to use you in certain ways, don't be afraid of that. Put your faith in God that he's going to get you through. I'm sure that you, maybe yourself, Danielle, before you speak on stage or whatever, there was a time you did that for the first time. You went, why do they want me to do? People aren't going to like me up here. I'm no good at this. Or I don't know how you felt.
No, you're like literally in my head. My good enough factor always goes off.
Right. And I am my own worst enemy myself, whether I'm performing music or I'm doing stand-up comedy or I'm sitting in front of a group at connecting congregations. There is a time every time that I do in front of a group of people where it's like, what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
Or, you're not good enough, or they're laughing at you, or they're sleeping when I'm giving the sermon. What's going on? So it's definitely, if God calls you to do something, just be aware that you're worthy of that calling.
Alan, you said like there was a period of 5 years or you drifted away. You felt very lukewarm. Tell me about that time of your life. And then also like, what was the point of like the catalyst of like, I don't want to do life like this anymore?
Like I said, I had experienced a spiritual awakening in the early to mid 90s. And then I just completely fell off. I had moved back to Chicago. I started attending a church, and once again, I was showing up, but I wasn't involved. Showing up, not involved. There's a big difference there. Anybody can go to church for an hour a week, and I felt like I was doing something, and then I just didn't go for a week, and then it was 2 weeks. Then I started meeting people that weren't going to church at all, so it was more important for me to go party on weekends than it was to bother waking up and prioritizing God. And I frankly just didn't. I look back now, I'm like, I don't know how I got through all that because, I wasn't doing anything spiritual. And so that was a rough time. And then I think God just really hit me over the head. It wasn't like I hit like a rock bottom moment. I certainly could have. With all the stupid stuff I was doing. I don't know how specific I need to get into.
No, you don't have to be so specific.
We can talk war stories later. I always like hanging out with my Christian friends and going, what did you used to do? You know what I mean? Because we're all like, how did we get, anyhow. But I think I just got to the point where I said, I just can't live like this anymore. This isn't working. And I finally one night was driving down the street on Roselle Boulevard, and I looked over and there was this dumpy old church. And I looked at it and I said, I'm going to go there on Sunday and I'm going to see what's up. And sure enough, I got there on a Sunday and was hanging out, and the pastor pulled me over and he said, how you doing? And it just meant a lot to me because it was like somebody cared. That made all the difference for me in the world because that pastor is still one of my best friends. The thing is, he invited me to a men's small group on Wednesday. And once again, I was still in this life of polar opposites. Like these guys on Wednesday night in my men's group, if they knew what I did last weekend and what I was about to do this weekend, they probably wouldn't want me here. But I showed up, and it was my first time there, and I thought it was going to be, I'd never been in a men's group before, so I thought it was going to be like Billy Graham and, Joel Osteen and these guys that are, whatever, men of pillars of faith. And I was like, I just don't belong here. And then they went around the room, and they asked me if I had believed in Jesus. I said yes. And I still, at this point, I was very self-conscious and just didn't feel like I belonged. And then they asked these two other guys there who were about to be baptized why they wanted to be baptized. And I'll never forget, the one guy said, well, because I need a bath. I knew at that moment that I fit in. Yeah. I knew at that moment that these other guys were just as lost as I was at that time. And everybody's got a different point in their faith journey. You're all at a different point. But showing up is the key. Showing up in life is 80%. I always say that. And I think just getting there at that point on that night at that place was the start of my second tier of my journey of faith. And I've never not been a part of a church or a men's group or a small group or whatever since.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm even above anybody or anything like that, but I think what I really learned was it's just critical to have relationships in your life with other Christians that you can admire, because that's how you grow. And then eventually, I like to say, good leaders teach other people how to lead. So a good leader is going to teach others, is going to mentor others how to lead. And so that's kind of what started happening. And from 2004, fast forward 8 years, I was actually leading that men's group.
Wow.
So I went from somebody that didn't think that they belonged at all to now I was leading the group, having other guys coming in where I was like, I was right where you were 8 years ago. You got a choice. Yeah. You can either keep doing what you're doing, and I've done it all. You want to, I know what it's like, or you can say, I'm really going to make that change. And I'm deciding to show up here instead and connect with this rather than that. Yeah. So that was a huge change. And I just kept going with it, and to this day, I'm still passionate about the same thing, just getting people to connect outside the church and their faith walk and meeting them where they are.
Thanks for sharing that, Alan, because I think there's so many of us that whether Jesus is new to us, we have experienced Jesus at a very young age, there is like periods of time where it feels a little lukewarm, or we become very mundane in the same process that we do. We just go to church on Sunday. And without that connection with other people, we aren't challenged. We aren't asked the question, how are you doing? Because I think about that a lot. Even people who have like families that are in their house, friends that you see, like, are we asking the question, like, how are you doing? And that relates to so many things. So that's so cool that you walked into that church, and then out of that, later, just were in a place that you could grow and continue to like lead the group in the future. That's amazing. Yeah. You talked about you and Sam earlier, and you're like, our marriage is dysfunctional. And I'm sure, we all like, you're not truly dysfunctional, but you're just like, are you sure like we're the right people? I'd love to ask you, like, how do you like bring Jesus into your life day to day in your marriage, or just like into friendship? I mean, how do you start incorporating that? And I'm not saying like, I know you're probably the person that knows all, Alan. That's okay. You can just say, what do you and Sam, like, how do you like check in on each other? How do you like ask about God in your life?
Well, I was married previous for 10 years. And my first marriage, she wasn't spiritual. And I kind of made the mistake of thinking that, well, she would go to church and then she stopped going to church when we got married. I kind of knew at that moment that it was pretty much over, just because we were just completely unequally yoked. And I was on this spiritual journey, and here I am, the worship team leader of the entire church, leading a men's group, and she's not even going. So I learned early on that that's a recipe for a disaster in marriage. And like I said, unfortunately, that marriage was terminated, but it brought me onto bigger and better things. And I will go to my grave not understanding how all that works, and Samantha's been married too. With Samantha, I asked God one thing when I started dating again. I asked God one thing. I said, God, please, I want to meet someone that I don't have to drag to church, which meaning that I want to meet somebody that's already at church, already active, already a Christian, already awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And make her beautiful and we're all good. You know what I mean? And fun and talented. We're all good. Well, I met Samantha, and she wasn't at the time really a practicing Christian. In fact, she was pretty much confused with her faith. And I kind of knew, interesting enough, I was like, well, I shouldn't date somebody that's not a Christian. I know that, but she's so beautiful that I couldn't help myself, right? So I said, well, God's going to, God, I'll handle this. Fast forward with our faith journey now, as far as going to church, doing things together, it has been a huge blessing of mine to just watch her grow.
Yeah.
She got baptized at Westridge in her street clothes.
Yes, it was fantastic.
Because she was just like, I'm doing this. And we're like, yes. And, we've been such a part. We attend church. We started when we were dating, we were attending church together. We started praying. It got me motivated back in. We grow together. And I think now in our faith journey, two things that are incredibly important, I think, in our marriage. A is we pray together. We pray together every day, every meal that we sit down. We pray together with our son. In fact, now our son is leading prayers for us.
Oh, that's sweet.
And you can say, well, that's nice and well. Hardest thing that I ever have to do is to pray with my wife when we're not getting along.
Yes, absolutely.
It is rough.
Yeah.
When you're not talking to your spouse and you're at each other's throats and, you just don't want to be near them and we're all there. And then you got to sit down and you got to pray over a meal with each other. That takes a lot. Or frankly, with our marriage group on Wednesday nights, there are times when we're not getting along at all. And I got to go to this group with her and act like we're good, let alone be the facilitators of the group.
Yeah.
And there have been times when I can't get a word out of her. She's pouting. There have been times that I'm all mad. Those are real times. You're going to go through that. How many times have you gone to church? You're just like, we're not getting along. You fight in the car on the way there. You step out and everything's fine.
Yes.
You're like, okay, turn it on for an hour. So I think in marriage, two things that are incredibly important. Pray together. And I think the thing is, I think being in a marriage group is critical. And I'll tell you why. Being in a marriage group means that you're growing together. I know people that one person in the marriage will be so active in the church and the other person will feel ostracized. And I know how harmful that can be in a marriage because God wants us to grow together. When you only have one person in a marriage growing spiritually, it causes a lot of tension because they're gone, they're doing things, they're passionate about this, I've got that. The other person doesn't feel like they're valued enough. So I would say that being in a marriage group is critical for a good marriage. It won't make your marriage perfect, but it'll make it better. And I think with raising kids, never be afraid to let your child know that you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And that you're a practicing Christian and how they can stand up for what is right. And always get to church, regardless of what activities you have. I know that with my wife and myself, there's going to be activities for Elliot where we're going to have to make some tough choices. What if he gets on a baseball team and they practice every Sunday? On my way to church every Sunday, I see nothing but football fields and baseball fields and cheerleading fields and volleyball fields filled with families and children. How are my wife and I going to handle that? And I think most importantly with a marriage, is practice what you preach. Walk the walk for yourself. I can't show my wife what a good Christian spouse is unless I can demonstrate that. And there are times that I'm not very good at it, but being an example to your spouse is the most important thing you can do. Somebody once told me the best thing you can do in life is be a good spouse for your kids. It's the best thing you can do. So, I've been blessed because Samantha, I think we have a good communication stream. We resolve conflict, which is important. Doesn't mean we don't get into conflict because we do, but it's a huge blessing. And the thing is, now that we're involved in the marriage ministry, we deal with a lot of marriages that are suffering.
Yeah.
And we're not experts here. And it can be draining. But once again, I get back to the fact of if God thinks you can do this and other people think you can do this, you can do this. Yeah. You can mentor other couples that are going through a tough time. So once again, another one of my passions is now that I find is I really want to build this amazing marriage ministry
Yeah.
for people that are married and just, we want to grow together. And it's so awesome to get in a group of married people. We all have a lot of the same issues.
Yeah.
Let's all talk. And it's like, it's so different than like a men's group or a women's group. Because what do they do at the men's group? They complain about their wives. What do they do at the women's group? Never been in one, but I'm going to guess that their husbands have a lot to do with the reason while they're sitting there or something along those lines. So it's great to be in a marriage group because we can all grow together and your spouse is growing with you, which is only going to make your life that much better.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. I mean, I'm still in a men's group, but I get so much more out of the marriage group because we're there and our kids are next door. We've been, trying to build this up. And I really have a passion for it because I know ultimately it works.
Yeah. I think that's so true. Like people just need that relationship in order to connect. And so whether you're married or not married, I mean, having those people in your life that are challenging you and just encouraging you in your faith. It is vital. I know connecting people is a part of your passion. And in addition to the marriage ministry, you have started, would you call it an organization? Connecting congregations.
The tagline is it's pretty much a chamber of commerce for the business community with a foundation of faith and support.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a conglomeration of mending our faith with our work life, with our support life. So for instance, about a year and a half ago, it's called Connecting Congregations, connectingcongregations.com. My passion about a year and a half ago was I attend Westridge every week. I love the people that go there. It's wonderful meeting them there. I'm also part of this marriage group, and I'm also part of a men's group. Okay, we're connecting there. And I asked myself, what is one area that we can continue to connect that we're not currently connecting with? And that is with our work life, what we do. It's such a huge part of each of our lives. We spend more time with the people we work with than we do with our own families, most people. What causes us a lot of stress in our life? Work. So I really believe that, once again, God kind of said, hey, wait a minute, maybe there's something there to start something where we could connect people in the workplace that go to church every week. Because I believe that at all churches, there's a vast resource of talent that we utilize during the week, but we just don't tap into that because we just don't know. So, one thing led to another, and we started this, like I said, this community of people that are in business or work in the workplace with a connection of our faith. Usually chambers of commerce are connected by their location. And I thought to myself, why not create a chamber of commerce for your church? So when you need something, there's somebody that you actually go to church with here every week that can do that. And so it's been wonderful, once again, to see people connect in the workplace. Me personally, I've worked with and have connected people through this ministry already that had no idea what they did for a living. Here's a plumber. Guess what? There's a plumber here. And because you share the same faith, or at least attend the same church, that's a powerful foundation for any relationship. And I believe that through the workplace, what's wonderful about it is we're connecting people that go to the same church, but it's not a church-sanctioned event, which is really the Acts church that Christ really set as a model in the early Acts church. They were doing life together. Everyone shared what they had with everyone else. And I love that in the sense that now that I know in my own personal life, if I need an attorney, a plumber, a realtor, if I need these things, I'm now aware that there's people that I know every Sunday that I can use and work with on these things. And another thing, the huge part that I think Connecting Congregations addresses is our faith in the workplace. I'm a software developer. For years, I would kind of leave God at the door. Let's get to work. I don't know your faith. You don't know my faith. I want to make a lot of money. I want to be successful. I've got aspirations and goals. And I just kind of thought, man, it's just so empty. And I just thought that if we could create this community of people that were connecting on so many different levels, it would strengthen not just the community and people, but think about how the church can benefit.
Yeah.
Because now we've got people connecting in the church outside of it during the week. I call it seeing people out in the wild.
Yeah.
We were at Old Republic watching a show 2 weeks ago, and there was a bunch of other people from Westridge there. And we had a great conversation because we went to church together. And it was wonderful. Just, here we are. We didn't know you guys liked late night rock music, and we were having a good time together and talking and really connecting. And I love moments like that because that's where you make the transition from just going to church to really being a church and being a community.
Yeah.
And that's where the transition is.
Just from listening to you today, Alan, there is this through line of connection for you. I mean, just from the beginning of those planting the seeds, from your friends speaking into you, how God is connecting with you individually, and then how that flows out into not only your marriage, your ministry, and connecting congregations. There's so many ways that God is using you. And when you talked earlier about am I capable to do this? God is going to continue to pour into our lives where we don't see I'm not sure. It's just it's so exciting to see and to watch these seeds come into fruition eventually. When we look back on our life, what a legacy. So thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Appreciate you.
If people want to get connected to you, how can they do that?
Well, you can email me. My software company is newfrontiers.com. Connectingcongregations.com is the ministry we were talking about. Or best thing to do, I am a greeter at Westridge the first and third Sunday of the month. Come on out to the West Door and say hello and chat.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alan. All of his information will be in today's show notes. Alan, thank you so much for being on the Parable Podcast.
Appreciate it.
I'm so grateful for how Alan shared and is continuing to say yes to the ways that God is calling him in his life. To connect with Alan or Connecting Congregations, simply visit daniellezapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Alan. Number 1, what is something you feel God is calling you to step into, but you feel maybe a little bit incapable? Just process through, how God is possibly molding you and using you for something more. Number 2, journal about some of those seeds that God has brought into fruition in your life. When we take the time to sit back and think through all of the ways that God has shown up in his faithfulness, it's beautiful to see all the fruit that is there. Also, a huge shout out to my husband, Eric, for editing this podcast today. I am thankful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember that your parable showcases how God uses connection to showcase your capability. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.